Hello, everybody, and welcome to Super Region 3 Round 2 Preview. I'm Brandon Meisner, joined again by Tony Nicolette. Tony, it's a pleasure to be here with you today. I think we'll have some great discussions. We had some great games last week, and I think there's a lot to look forward to this week.
Couldn't agree more, Brandon. Let's rip it.
All right, awesome. Well, let's start first with the results of last week's games. Obviously, if you watch Inside D2 Football, you're aware that, or pay any attention to Division II at all, you're aware that the two-time national champion Ferris State Bulldogs will not be a three-peat. The Lakers of Grand Valley were able to beat the Bulldogs 21-14 in a game in Allendale, Michigan, a game that you were at, Tony. We talked about it on Inside D2 Football, but tell me about what you saw when you were there.
Yeah, you're right. We did talk about it, and the story really hasn't changed. This was a rock fight, just like they tend to be in this series. This is the sixth time that these two teams have played each other in the last 25-ish months. So there's a lot of familiarity there, and the defenses were ready for each other. And, both teams were coming in as high-powered offenses, which we're kind of used to. And both teams were held 200-plus yards below their season averages. Mm-hmm. So every yard was just a scratch and a claw type of affair. Ultimately, in the second half, Grand Valley was able to spring a couple of big plays. One on a dime from Cade Peterson to Daryl Johnson that got a touchdown that we saw a little bit earlier in the roll there. And then one that you didn't see was probably the biggest and really the only major mistake that Ferris made defensively in this game was a busted coverage. And Peterson had the time, was able to find Coney Tierney deep for a 72-yarder, and that stretched things out to 21-7 in the fourth quarter in favor of Grand Valley. And it was just too much to overcome for Ferris. They moved the ball very methodically on a big long drive to try and draw close, and Grand Valley shut the door on that drive, and that pretty much killed the entire fourth quarter in terms of how long Ferris possessed the ball. And we talked about this on the show too. If we felt like the absence of Tony Anise had an impact, that possession and the way the clock was managed in it might have been a spot where you could see that. But at the same time, that drive was so emblematic of the game in its entirety. It was just, no matter how big an advantage you thought you had, the other defense was there to close it down on you, and it just took forever and so much from you to be able to get yardage and gain plays and gain first downs. And Ferris on that drive, I could go back and look at it, but I mean, they converted at least 2/3 and I think 1 or 2 fourth downs in the duration of that drive, and it just, again, gave a glowing example of just how difficult it was to move the ball for those offenses in that game. So familiar with each other. It was a really great game to be at. It really was. I mean, because it's just two high-level teams just making it so hard on the other one to gain an advantage.
It was in stark contrast to the first game where there were all sorts of points scored. And in the first game, I think, my friends who are Grand Valley alums kind of talked about how after Ferris had cut the lead to, I think, 7 in the second half, Grand Valley exploded. And I think the margin was 21. And in the fourth quarter at 21, they felt comfortable. This game was totally different, where it felt like, to me, if maybe because of the way it was played out, maybe in the fourth quarter, if you got to 17, you would feel comfortable. But that third score was going to be huge, even if it was a field goal or maybe even a safety. The game was so different than the other one. It was shocking to see that difference, but it was, somewhat expected when teams are so familiar with each other, as you said.
Yeah, well, and that's what happens, right? When they're that familiar with each other, one of the sides of the ball is going to take advantage of it. So you're either going to get that low-scoring grudge match, or both offenses are just zipping and bebopping all over each other because they know what works. And again, with the style of ball that gets played between these two teams and their capabilities in the trenches, particularly in their front 4 and front 7 alignments on their defenses, usually that's what, if it's going to be something where the familiarity gets you somewhere, it's probably going to be the defenses that went out. And that's absolutely what we saw in that game.
Well, Anyway, congratulations to the Lakers for moving on. Obviously, as we did on the show, mentioned that what Ferris State's been able to accomplish is incredible. It's hard to three-peat. They're the third team since UNA repeated in 93, 94, 95. They're the third team with an opportunity to do so, and all have failed since then. I just think it's tough to do in today's football, and it's especially true with the transfer portal. So Pat, be impressive by the Bulldogs as well.
Well, and then I mean you have to look at what the Bulldogs have done in this run in totality too, and the number escapes me, Brandon, but it's either 5 or 6 consecutive regional finals for them. I mean, so it's this first round exit. You know, obviously we've already griped, rightfully so, and loudly so about how ridiculous it was that these two teams played in the first round.
There's an asterisk, next to the first round exit
for sure, 100%. But I mean, you look at how deep they've been able to get into the playoffs for so many years in a row. I mean, it's just, I mean, okay, they didn't win 3 straight, but when you look at it over the last 5-6 years, there's nobody that has consistently performed at that level like Ferris has. It's just, you can't do anything but tip your cap to that.
And you know, and honestly, outside of Grand Valley, the past 2 years, they've kind of felt like an unstoppable force. And, you know, I mean, they played that, you know, not only have they won all these games and achieved so much, they've also done it in a dominating fashion. So, anyway, wanted to congratulate them. I know that obviously the season didn't end the way that they wanted, but, you know, they're not going to win it every year. Nobody's North Dakota State, apparently. Not even North Dakota State anymore. So.
Well, and hey, football doesn't work that way, Brandon. We all know that.
That's exactly, and that's why it's fun, man. You know, if it all was chalk every time, it wouldn't be fun to talk about, to watch, or certainly to cover. So let's go ahead and move on to another game. And the Pittsburgh State Gorillas were able to, despite it being close early, were able to win in what looks like fairly convincing fashion, 35-14 over Indianapolis from the Great Lakes Valley Conference. Tony, you've had a chance to review the video of that. What were your takeaways from that game?
Yeah, you're right. This game actually was pretty close throughout the bulk of the first 3 quarters. You know, both teams, I think, spent a little bit of time kind of feeling each other out, trying to decide what was going to work and what wasn't. You know, in the clip here, we saw Pitt State get a safety early in the game, but the reason that they were in a position to do so was because they failed on 4 straight cracks from inside the 2 on the possession that preceded it. And Indy's defense rose up and got a goal line stand. So that's one of the shames of playing good defense, is sometimes you put your offense in a tough spot, and that's what happened there. But, you know, in the first half, Indianapolis actually, I mean, okay, that possession didn't end well. They actually had multiple possessions end on the Pitt State side of the field, a couple of interceptions. They had once or twice that they had to punt after crossing midfield. And of course, they got the touchdown drive as well. But I mean, in that game, Pitt State, when you look at the score 35-14, it kind of feels like you see that score, and usually you think of a game script that they were very much in control of it. And while, you know, as you watch the game, you kind of felt like Pitt State was in control, but their grasp on the game was probably more tenuous at times than maybe people might think. Again, it was a 1-score game at the break, and they didn't stretch it out to 2 scores until like 5 minutes to go in the third quarter. That was just with a field goal.
Yeah, it was like 8-7 at the half or something. It was something like that. I know they only had 8, but
no, it was 15-7 at the half.
There we go. Yeah. Okay.
And you know, again, you look at the game though, and again, stats will make liars out of you. But I mean, you know, Indianapolis ran the ball for 155 yards net. I mean, after you figure in the 4 sacks, I mean, John Lewis actually had a pretty solid game, averaging just under 6 yards a crack. And there were a couple of different points where you watch the game and you think, man, Indy's running the ball pretty well. And outside of a few good pops by Ty Pennington, Pitt State really struggled running the ball in this game. It was Chad Dodson Jr. and you know, Devin Garrison who really did the bulk of the damage in this game for Pitt State when they had the ball. So I have to say, I was a little impressed with Indianapolis and their ability to actually get some control there in the trenches and run the ball the way they did and really take away Pitt State's run. Which again, that's usually your formula to stay in games. And I think maybe you just from there saw maybe the delta between the MIAA and the GLVC, and that, even though Indianapolis did a lot of good stuff and had some control in some ways, Pitt State was still able to kind of, muscle things out. And then in the fourth quarter, a couple of short fields and whatnot, they were able to kind of stretch things out a little bit.
Sure. And, as you said, Chad Dodson, very efficient. There was a question mark if he was going to play. Threw for 282 and threw for about 75%, 3 touchdowns. So an impressive performance by him. But as you said, Indy did gain 336 of offense, and that that usually doesn't win you a playoff game. And of course they didn't win. But what I'm talking about is from the Pitt State perspective. Is that's a lot to give up in a game that you lost. The thing I really enjoy about playoff football is that all the nonsense numbers usually come down a lot in the playoffs, and they look like real football games.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that here in a minute. But so I think that has to be a little bit of concerning for Pitt State to give up that many yards in the game. When you watched it, was the Pitt State defense what you thought it would be? Is it different compared to last year?
No, it was probably pretty well aligned to what I thought it would be. Their defensive line play was solid. They had a couple of linebackers that made a lot of plays.
Yes.
I think Barkley was one of them. And again, I mean, even though Indianapolis with Gavin Sukup's thrown the ball a lot more this year, it wasn't like they were consistently trying to push the ball downfield deep as much as maybe I was expecting them to. And again, they actually ran the ball quite well. I think the one thing that Pitt State did a real good job of, though, is even just within the context of specific drives, Indianapolis would get the ball into plus territory, and then all of a sudden, either Pitt State would find a way to clamp down, or the Greyhounds would come at a penalty that would kind of shoot themselves in the foot. I mean, Indianapolis had the ball. They got a 3-and-out early in the third quarter and took that possession immediately into Pitt State territory, and then got a hold that backed them up, and the drive stalled. And so, you're looking at that going, okay, you're down 15-7. Even if you go get a field goal there and get yourself to where a touchdown puts you ahead, you're keeping yourself tight. And that hold really just kind of the drive unraveled after that. And from there, Indy's offense just was far less efficient and far less capable kind of after that. So again, it was almost as if Pitt State kind of knew that, all right, we're going to let you kind of have your feel here for a little bit. Once you get on our side of the field, we're going to tighten up a little bit. And they were able to do that on most of Indy's possessions. Because again, especially you look back to that first half, Indy had at least 2 or 3 possessions where they made it into plus territory. One of Sukup's picks was, I think a linebacker got a real good drop and he just didn't see him. So you got to tip your cap to Pitt State for playing that play really well. And the other one was a 50-50 ball, and the 50 went the wrong way. So, but nevertheless, you're talking about interceptions in opposing territory. So they had moved the ball well enough to get themselves that far. So, whether Indy's is capable of finishing drives, maybe as some of the teams that Pitt State might see the rest of the way, I guess that's a topic for discussion later in this show, I would think.
For sure. All right, I mentioned a second ago that in the playoffs, nonsense numbers kind of are reduced. They go away. We don't see them. Well, that's not always the case because we saw them in Warrensburg.
Indeed.
Central Missouri beats Henderson State 56-14. And they honestly, Central shut it down basically after the half. And it was a dominant performance by them. Let's play some highlights. But what I want to watch, Tony, is to have you specifically look at all the time that Zach Zabrowski has to throw. There, he faced a little pressure and was able to find Michael Fitzgerald, who had a big game for them. But watch that now on this one. You see that there's not even a 2-man rush. They both got caught standing up because of the tempo with which UVM plays. So I charted the entire game. Here's another one. Nobody in his face, able to get the ball away. They're going to end up scoring on this drive after a roll to the right. to find an open receiver. I think that is. I'm sorry, that was the best receiver. His name's escaping me for Central Missouri right now. All conference guy. But anyway, long story short, there's a tight end they hit. But you're seeing there's all sorts of time for Central to throw. I actually went back and rewatched the game and did an accounting of every snap, every time Central dropped back. And so they had 43 total dropbacks with Zabrowski in the game. He was untouched 30 times. Like nobody touched him at all. That includes one of those rollouts you just saw.
Yeah.
He got hit. Had one player in his face once without contact. He got hit 5 times, was sacked once, and then took off rushing twice. So basically, he played, he was one of the cleanest games a quarterback could have. Sure. I mean, you'll see a bunch of time here. That's insane. That would have counted as a rollout to the right. So they were just not pressured. And, they were up big after one. They were up big at the half, and they just rolled to the win. And their gift, the reward for winning that game is going to be to play Harding this weekend. And that will be one of the most amazing matchups that I can't tell you how exciting I am to see this one.
I am too.
Let's go ahead. We'll touch on that in 1 second. But one of the things I thought was interesting about this, and I think it kind of explains things too, about the outcome of this game, which doesn't necessarily allow conclusions to be drawn. Excuse me, for Central's game with Harding. Scott Maxfield is the head coach of Henderson. He was quoted as saying, really the strength of our defense is our run defense. We were challenged today in an area we had really not been challenged up to this point. So if you think about the way the GAC plays football, the best team, Harding, they're going to run. They're going to punch you in the face.
Yeah.
Like Baptist, they're going to run.
Yeah.
So in some ways, Central was facing the best case scenario they could on defense. I'm sorry, on offense. They're facing the best case design of a defense that they could have faced is one that's not geared to stop the pass at all. We had mentioned all the last week. We talked about the fact that Henderson got to the quarterback so well, 40 sacks going into the game. And they weren't able to put the pressure on Zabrowski or the Mule offense, and that's exactly what happened there.
Yeah, and I guess the thing that baffles me the most in watching some of this game was, what you're talking about. If Henderson came in with, the pass rush stats and what have you, and yet you saw multiple times in those clips where they're only bringing 2 or 3. So either their front is dominant within the GAC and they're able to get home with just that, or they were just caught flat-footed a lot by Central's tempo. So that'll be interesting to see how that continues through as we move through the playoffs. I guess the other thing that really struck me though is if you're rushing the passer and you're good at that, that's fine. But if you're only bringing 2 or 3, guys like Michael Fitzgerald can't get lost. and there were a couple of those clips where he was just cut completely loose, and it's just like, he's their best guy. How do you let that guy run all by himself? Basically, unfettered. I mean, I don't know. It's kind of, you can't have it both ways, right? You can't drop 8 or 9 into coverage, but then cut people loose. That's just not supposed to happen. So, I just don't know if that was Henderson State was just out of sorts, completely outmatched, or is it just exactly what you said? Within the GAC, they're used to being much more run focused, and this was just a nightmare matchup for them, where you've got a team who is going to sling it all over the lot, and you just don't have the personnel or the scheme to have a prayer against that. If that's what it was, then okay, you tip your cap to the Reddies for giving it the college try. But yeah, it sure seemed like they were at a major disadvantage, and I'm not smart enough to know without the coach telling me exactly what that disadvantage might be. But I think you might be onto something with your analysis of it.
Some of it's with the receivers though too, Because, we talked about Fitzgerald, and
yeah.
you talked about how you can't let him get open. He's the only guy on Central's roster that wasn't first or second team, or the only wide receiver in their two deep that wasn't first or second team all conference. I mean,
I don't know,
that's crazy. Arkell Smith was the guy who I mentioned earlier, which is number 6 on the video. That's the one I couldn't remember his name. And then Pospisil and Gregory also have. I mean, it's a very talented receiver corps, one of the best that I've ever seen covering Division II. Now, let's transition.
I don't know how you lose a guy who's 6'6". That's why I was kind of focused on Mr. Fitzgerald.
He is huge.
He's kind of tough to miss.
He looks every bit of that 6'6" in person.
Yes, he does.
I mean, it is insane how big he is. So,
right.
All right. So let's transition to a team who we know will doesn't really even care about throwing the football that much. That's Harding, and they're going to host the Mules.
Not unless you make them.
Yeah, I don't know many people who do. At least make them into a throwing team. But Central Missouri will travel to the 1 seed Harding, so it's 4-1. As I said a minute ago, and I'm just sincere about this, I have not been this excited for a playoff football game in many, many years, because this is so interesting, because it's teams that aren't familiar with each other playing, teams that play such distinctly different styles. And I could see this game going many different ways, and I don't know which way it's going to go. So that to me is like a joy to have this game coming up.
Absolutely. Well, and I mean, there's a reason that you only still have a handful of schools that run the type of offense that Harding runs, but the ones who choose to do it, and the ones that can do it as well as the Bisons do, there's an advantage to them for that. And I guess that's the thing, right? I mean, they're by far the number 1 rushing offense in the country. And I mean, I think it's by you're showing in here that they rush for 472 a game. I think the team that finished in second for the season in D2 was below 250 a game. I mean, it was the delta was just massive. But then, conversely, I mean, Central Missouri, it was, I'm pretty sure they were the most prolific total offense in the country, and they might have been the most prolific passing offense in the country. So, I mean, you encapsulated it beautifully, and that's just their approaches to the offensive end of the game are just so diametrically opposed.
Right.
As you might think, with a run-first team like Harding does, they play really good defense. And if maybe there's an Achilles that you look at initially for SEMO, it's that their defense maybe not quite as stout.
Yeah, you were right, Tony. Harding is number 1 in rushing offense. I have a little bit numbers than the NCAA does, but 420. I got the same amount they do, 422. And then number 2 was 290.
Okay, yeah. I knew it was a big delta.
Yeah. I mean, that's over 100. So
I mean, they were in the 4s, and the nearest one was below 300. So you're looking at that going, holy crap.
Exactly. Now, this is what all right. I there's been some discussion on our board by Central folks that I find hilarious, because they're treating Harding. It's out of ignorance, and I don't mean that meanly. I mean, they just don't know because they haven't seen it and played it yet. They're treating Harding like any other rushing team that rushes the football.
Oh, geez.
And you cannot treat it that way.
Mistake.
Harding's offense has the same effect on a football game as Central's offense.
Yes.
Just in a completely different way.
Yep.
And my biggest question in this game, and I think I picked Harding to win on Inside D2 Football, but I could see it going a couple of different ways. Like, my biggest questions are, can Harding's got a really good defense, and they've had a really good defense for a number of years, but can they match up on the back end with the number of receivers that Central will throw at them?
Sure.
And I think that's a huge question.
Well, and I think the question's valid from the standpoint of, you just talked about it in terms of Henderson State. Now, Henderson State's not Harding, okay. But again, they're from the same conference, and the style of play that seems to prevail in that conference is a little more run heavy and not sling it all over the lot heavy. So if Harding is built to stop most of what they see in the GAC, particularly with an insular schedule, you're right on it. Do they have a back end that can hang with the size and the speed of the receivers that they're going to see on Saturday? Obviously, we saw in a couple of examples there, Henderson just didn't, and I'm not trying to knock the Reddies. I was stoked to see them make the bracket, but it just was obvious that they didn't have what was needed to be able to make something happen there. Now, for me, I get the back end, but I still am always a big proponent of, hey, what are you going to do up front? And I guess that's the biggest thing that I'm looking for out of that Harding defense is not so much are they set up to be able to handle the passes. What are they going to do in terms of pass rush? What are they going to do at the line to try and make Zabrowski uncomfortable? And
you can eliminate the need to cover.
Well, it makes the emphasis on the back end much less.
Right.
Yeah.
And so as you see on the graphic, they have 27 sacks this year. That's a pretty good number in a conference that doesn't throw a lot.
Yeah.
But there's one thing, I joke all the time, stats are for losers. And I kind of believe that, but there's one thing that you can't, unless you do a deep dive into it, how many of those sacks occur when they've got like a 14-point lead on an opponent and the opponent's forced to throw?
Right.
And it changes the dynamic. So, so I don't know what I can gauge from the total of 27 sacks without going back and watching every game, which obviously is something that we don't have the time or resources to do.
Sure.
And so that is interesting. Now, conversely, Central Missouri is not known for defense. I think you've heard me say it multiple times that their Achilles heel is their defense, or they will go as far as their defense will take them. And as you see, they give up 366 a game. That's on the season.
Yeah.
Now, that's obviously covered by the fact that they're at 600 yards a game. But will they have the ability to stop the Harding rushing attack? Because I've only known one team that has really stopped the Harding rushing attack. And it'll be interesting to me on the other side, can the Mules stop the Bisons at all? And I don't know.
And I don't know that either. And it's funny how this is part of what makes this game so fun to break down, right? Is that, when we're talking about Harding trying to defend Central Missouri, it's okay. Do they have the personnel? Are they used to seeing it? Can they get a pass rush? All those sorts of things. When it comes to Central Missouri stopping Harding, it's just going to flat out be, can they get themselves prepared in a week's time for something that most of those kids haven't seen since high school, right? I mean, that's really what it is. This is an offense that's a little bit more common in high school. It's becoming less so. But I mean, most of these kids have not had to try to defend something like this. It's certainly probably in their college career, because I can't think of any MIAA teams that run anything even remotely similar to this.
I don't think there's another team in the country that runs.
Probably not, because even Northwood doesn't run the same type of wood bone that they used to. So I mean, those were the two teams you could count on for that, and one of them I don't even think really does it anymore. So, So I mean, to me, that's what the neat part of this is. Central Missouri might have a fantastic defense. That doesn't mean they can get themselves ready to stop what this is. And this is one of the critical levers of this game too, because, we talked about this, and this is one of the things that I think both Chuck and Whit very astutely pointed out on Inside D2 on Sunday is, does Harding succeed in being who they are well enough to where Central gets frustrated? Because, again, that's one of the things that Harding is banking on, is that they're going to irritate the crap out of you because they're just going to bludgeon you to death. If they only get 3 or 4 yards of crack, that's just fine by them. Right. And the clock sits and burns the whole stinking time, and they end up putting it in on you. And now they got a touchdown, and now your offense comes out there all charged up, man. If somehow they manage to make you punt, they're just They're just sticking it to you, and the next thing you know, it's halftime, and you've only had the ball twice,
right?
And you're just hoping you're tied. And for a team that is so high flying like Central Missouri, again, can Harding frustrate them and get them out of rhythm?
I think that is a great observation because I've seen them do that many times to many teams. You know, this is super region I've had to follow. I'm in the middle of it, and I've seen that exactly play out. You know, I hate when we compare college to the NFL, but it's been talked about so much. The Philadelphia Eagles tush push, how they feel like they're in, like when they get a first down, it's 1st and 9.
Yeah, right.
Harding was the original at that.
Yeah,
you know, you feel like if it as a defense, they're in like 1st and 8, because if it's 4th and 3, they might not go for it, but if it's 4th and 2, they're probably going to go for it. Sometimes it doesn't matter where they are on the field.
Yeah.
And you think they're likely going to get it. That's another point of frustration, is that a defense has to play for 4 plays, not 3, every new first down.
Well, it's 4 plays, not 3. And that's probably, I'm with you. I would say that it may not matter where on the field they are. I would say certainly if they're outside of the -40,
right,
they're going to go. One could argue that it starts to bleed its way back to the -30, and maybe if they're inside their own 30, they think twice about sending the punt unit out there if it's 4th and 1 or 4th and 2. Totally agree.
Right. And that's going to be frustrating. Nobody would know him. He's new to Division II. Greg Jones is the D coordinator at Central. He's a local legend as a high school coach here. He went to Oregon for a year, and now he's the DC at Central. So I think some of his high school experience, recent high school experience, will help.
Sure.
Maybe to come up with a scheme for this. But that will be interesting. And I am like giddy looking forward to this game just to see how it plays out. I want an answer to the question of how this one's going to play out. And I can't wait for it on Saturday.
Yeah. Well, I share your excitement. This one's really going to be fun.
All right, let's talk about the other one that is fun for a different reason. For me, who I've been doing this stuff online for a quarter century now, and these blue bloods have never played. And I'm very excited about Pitt State as the Gorillas travel to Grand Valley. It's much different in terms of predicting the game. There's so many questions with Harding and Central. There are fewer questions with Grand Valley and Pitt. I think I know the type of game it's going to be. I just don't know who would win yet. And I'm, correct me if I'm wrong. If you have a different view, please tell me. But I'm thinking this is going to be a game that's going to be more similar to the Ferris game last week and with Grand Valley than it would be to the first game with Grand Valley. I think the winner in this one could be at 24 or 28, and that might be all it takes to win. Are you seeing it differently?
I think you're probably onto something there, Brandon, and I think part of that is maybe just a cap tip to Pitt State in a certain way, because that's just the style of play that they employ, right? They don't score a ton of points, and yet nobody's really ever close to them either. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's one of those things where, they've got that kind of 35-16 average for the year. They've only gone over 40 points, I think, a couple of times. Whereas, Grand Valley, they've scored more than 60 2 or 3 times,
Right.
So the fact that there's a physicality that Pitt State's going to be capable of bringing into this one, I think that's something that is going to be much more akin to what Grand Valley saw last week with a Ferris. And so that'll be interesting. I think for me, the things that I'm really keen to see are, again, we saw Indianapolis run the ball with a great deal of success last week. Does Grand Valley try to see where that came from and see if that's something that they can replicate? I think another thing that I'm interested in seeing is, Pitt State, even if they can't run the ball successfully, which I think they only had like 79 yards in that game against Indianapolis. And we all know how strong Grand Valley is against the run. I think they finished the season top 2 or top 3 in the country, somewhere in that 50, 55 yards a game allowed.
54 right on the screen there.
Yeah.
There's quite a rushing differential, basically plus 200 a game.
Right. So if Pitt State can't run the ball, how well can they protect Chad Dotson? Because obviously we know that Grand Valley led the country in sacks.
That's the biggest question. Yep.
And then from there, Pitt State uses the tight end more than anybody that Grand Valley has seen all year, particularly within the GLIAC. And so how does Grand Valley adapt to having to guard guys like Devin Garrison when they just haven't had to bird dog someone like that throughout the bulk of the year? I mean, that can be a real potential matchup problem in that tight ends on average tend to, draw linebackers in coverage. Well, okay, you got to figure Garrison's probably going to have a speed advantage. And if they try to put a corner or a safety on him, he's going to have a size advantage. So that's a unique challenge that if Pitt State, because Pitt State's going to want to run the ball. We know that. That's what they want to do first. I mean, again, they ran the ball for $167 this year per game. That's usually your bread and butter. And Dotson loves to throw off play action, right? So that's part of what makes tight end routes work, is when you can keep those linebackers a little bit guessing. So I'm really interested to see what Grand Valley does in that middle and back end when they're dealing with the types of pass catchers that Pitt State has, because I don't know that Grand Valley has really seen a lot of that. I think the other thing, too, that's the wild card here that I'm really interested to see is how does Pitt State, again, deal with Grand Valley's run game and deal with Grand Valley's run game in the respect that it's very multiple. You might see Cade Peterson pull the ball down if he doesn't like anything in the pass game and take off. You might see him or Avery Moore with a lot of direct snap or quarterback designed runs. We saw a little bit of wildcat with Khalil Eichelberger and Tariq Reed for Grand Valley last week against Ferris. Do the Lakers do that? And of course, Lakers do a ton of reverse type things. So how well does Pitt State adapt to where Grand Valley is going to want to run the ball from? Are they going to even stay as multiple? Because, again, Indianapolis really didn't try a lot of that. I think they tried one reverse in that game, and Pitt snuffed it out.
Yes, they did.
Indy's success was just, hey, let's just run our either zone stretch or let's run right between the tackles and let's go after it. So, can Pitt State's defense dictate to Grand Valley how they're going to run the ball and control any of that, or are they going to be a little bit susceptible like we saw last week? All neat stuff to watch.
It is. I think definitely – I believe that Pitt State has the ability to play ball control football through the air. You're seeing it with Chad Dobson's completion percentage. The question I have is something you mentioned before. Can they slow down the pressure of the Grand Valley D line, which is probably going to be the best that they face this year? And to me, that's the key to the game. I picked Grand Valley to win on Inside D2 Football. I don't know. I think you did too.
Yeah.
But if Pitt has a chance in this game, it will be because their offensive line gives Dotson enough time and gives the offense enough time to control the ball through the air. And that to me is their recipe for success and their chance to win in this one.
Well, and then to even just throw it a little bit more onto that, one of the other things too is again, we talked about how Indy was able to cross midfield a few times and then kind of stall out. We actually saw Pitt State struggle with that a little bit early in the game, where they were able to get the ball into the plus 45, plus 40, but then kind of stall out. And that's the thing, is if Dotson's comfortable and they're able to use the short passing game and move the ball down the field, but then when they get inside the 30, inside the 25, possibly even to the red zone where the thirds shrink and everything gets condensed, right? How well are they actually going to be able to finish drives? And that's actually, a great, thing for Grand Valley. That's a good question for them too, because there have been times throughout the year where Grand Valley maybe moves the ball great between the 20s and you get in the red zone and it gets tough. So that's when you're playing good teams, it gets harder to score after you've moved the ball through the midsection of the field. So, but yeah, I would think just based on the style that Pitt State employs with that, again, they're not super explosive, not tons of big plays. if Grand Valley continues to tackle in space like they have all year this year, how well do they actually score the football if they get in tight? That's one of the other things for Pitt State that I'll be interested to watch.
All right. Well, again, we've talked about how excited we are for these games. We have, as far as I know, to me, these are fresh, fun games because these are unfamiliar opponents, basically for all four teams involved. And I think, certainly the one played in Searcy, Arkansas, is just a total head scratcher.
Yeah.
I don't have a clue what's coming on. I am hyped about this weekend's games.
Yeah, I think you picked Harding on Inside D too. I picked Central, and I'm still scratching my head going, I'm not sure if I know why. That's what makes this game great, because you're just like, man,
absolutely.
I could
figure out a way
for 18 scenarios for this.
Yes. Yeah, I can figure out a way for each of them to win easily. I just don't know which is the most realistic, which probably means it'll be something completely that we haven't even imagined.
Totally. Yeah, we'll probably look like dopes on Saturday night, because everything that we theorized about the game, none of it will actually happen. It'll be something completely off the wall.
Exactly. So, all right. Just a reminder, this weekend, if you want direct links to live stats or to the games themselves, you can go to our website, d2football.com, click on the scores tab. The links will be there, and they'll be easy to access that way. If you do have a subscription to Huddle and you are watching the playoff games, just wanted to let you know, if you tune into the Grand Valley Pitt game, you'll be able to hear Tony Nicolette, the man on the screen right now. He will be part of the broadcast of that game. So you'll get to hear his insight during the game, and I think you all really will enjoy that. But otherwise, we will be back next week. We'll talk about the regional final as we get closer to crowning a national champion in 2023. So for Tony Nicolette, I'm Brandon Meisner. Thank you very much for watching our Super Region 3 preview, and we will see you next week.